Hello, everyone, and thank you all for joining us today for the 2020 Marketplace of the Future. I hope you all have been enjoying your time in Gather. My name is Marco Salazar, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of Be Social Change, and we have an awesome conversation today on the future of carbon labeling. So we have two amazing guests that are doing really awesome work and innovative work within this space. We have Alexander Fratzin, and they can let me know if I'm pronouncing him right, founder of Carbon Calories. And then we also have Sandra Noonan, head of sustainability at Just Salad. So going to be a really fun conversation. The other thing before we get started is I just wanted to give a quick shout out to three of our sponsors. The first is Just Salad, and we're going to be talking with Sandra about all the awesome work that they're doing, but they're the first US restaurant chain to carbon label their menu, and we're going to get all into everything Just Salad. Also wanted to thank the Starrett Lehigh building. They're the home for the Center for Social Innovation, the birthplace of Marketplace for the Future, as well as a home for my organization, Be Social Change. So they're located in West Chelsea, Manhattan. The building has replaced 8 miles of windows to conserve energy, offered free building-wide composting, installed a rooftop garden with bees, and they always continue to be a really good support for Marketplace for the Future. Also wanted to give a shout out to Pildora. It's a community and a one-stop shop for sustainable fashion, accessories, and clean beauty, featuring over 100 impact brands from over 25 countries. So you can visit them at pildora.com, and you can also find them in the Lifestyle Pavilion. So let's go ahead and just dive in. Welcome, Sandra and Alexander. Good to chat with you today.
Yeah, thanks.
Great to be here.
Awesome. So I am super excited about this panel because I'll be honest, like we do a lot of sustainable events, and carbon labeling is something that's new to me. So I'm very excited to get into that, the work that you're doing within that context, and also just the overall sustainable movement as a whole. So to kick it off, Sandra, I'd love for you to just share a little bit about yourself and the work that you're doing as head of sustainability at Just Salad.
Sure, thank you. So Just Salad is a restaurant chain founded in New York City in 2006. We have 41 locations, mostly along the East Coast of the US. And in late 2019, we made the decision to put climate action more squarely in the hands of the consumer. We're known for the reusable bowl program, which has saved 75,000 pounds of plastic from landfills every year, but we really hadn't had a robust discussion with our customers about the link between food and climate change. And so that was the origin of the carbon label that we launched on Thursday of last week, right in time for Climate Week. And yeah, I think we'll get into the story behind the carbon label a little more throughout this panel discussion. But you know, in summary, it's something you can see at our website, orderjustsalad.com, and justsalad.com/menu. And in addition to the carbon label, we wanted to make it even easier for our guests to choose low impact options. So in addition to the carbon label, on Thursday of last week, we launched a climatarian menu. And that climatarian menu coexists with our vegan and paleo menu. And the climatarian menu is like your one-stop shop. If you really want to eat low impact, low CO2, we're putting our lowest impact options there. So we're really excited to hopefully scale carbon labeling and make it as commonplace as the calorie label.
Awesome. Love it. Thanks so much for sharing. And Alexander, can you share a little bit about the work that you do at Carbon Calories?
Yeah, so at Carbon Calories, the name comes from the nutrition facts label, the same way that we measure calories for food products. I think that we should be, and I'm not alone, that many people want to be measuring carbon the way that Just Salad does for their food products, and the way that a handful of other brands in the world either are or have committed to. And so what we do is that we have basically designed a consumer-centric carbon statement or reporting tool for consumers because we want to empower consumers to be able to make well-informed decisions. That's how Carbon Calories believes that carbon labels should be designed. So we worked on designing a carbon label that worked for the consumers because there are several roadblocks to carbon labeling for companies, and an effective tool to communicate or reporting standard is one of the impediments. And so that's what we're focusing on. And we're also going to be developing streamlined methods of calculating product carbon footprints, because another challenge for companies in terms of delivering carbon labeling is it's cost prohibitive in many instances. So there's a price point issue for especially smaller brands. And so those are sort of like the two, if I had to summarize, the two challenges that we're tackling to try and support companies to deliver carbon labeling for consumers.
Awesome. And I think just to kick it off on a higher level, and this could be both of you or Sandra, I know we talked and you might want to share something. What is carbon labeling? Like, how do you define that? And more importantly, what does that really look like?
Yeah. So just to, I think, to take one step back, 26% of global greenhouse gas emissions are linked to the food system. And a very large chunk of that 26% is directly related to the choices we make as consumers as to what we eat. And so if we know that, then it stands to reason that we can lower greenhouse gas emissions every day, at least 3 times a day, or at least be part of the pathway to lower emissions. And so the carbon label comes out of the idea that transparency creates agency, and people have agency over something as overwhelming as climate change if they just have some simple numbers. And so the carbon label is an estimate of the greenhouse gas emissions, at least in Just Salad's case. It's going to be different for other products, but in Just Salad's case, the carbon label is the estimated greenhouse gas emissions of growing and transporting the food from its place of origin to our distribution centers in the US. And so you'll hear when you read about, and Alexander is the expert on this, but when you read about carbon footprinting, you'll hear about cradle to farm gate, or cradle to manufacturer gate, or cradle to retail gate. That is referring to the boundaries of our calculations. And so in Just Salad's case, we are reflecting on our online menu the emissions associated with growing, producing, and transporting that food. And yeah, I'll leave it there.
Awesome. Alexander, do you want to chime in? And then I'd love to also, if you want, Sandra, come back to you and you can kind of share what that visually looks like.
Yeah, so product carbon footprint accounting is typically it's defined as the carbon emissions over the life cycle of products production to use. And so some cradle to farm gate would be a portion of that. And then other products or other methods of accounting include other factors. And these are difficult. In many cases, they require assumptions. Because, for example, in the case of like consumption at the end of by the consumer, companies don't know how all the consumers are going to consume the product. You know, food is a little bit simpler, perhaps, but you know, in the case of a T-shirt, a company doesn't know how many times the consumer is going to use it or how they're going to wash and dry it. So, you know, portions of this life cycle assessment are more or less difficult for the companies to approximate. And that's where Carbon Calories, the way that we are approaching it, is that we want to provide a complete carbon life cycle report, or the label, the statements that we prepare. We include both basically the production side emissions, which are under the ownership or control of the company or the company's supply chain. And then we also want to explain how the emissions happen at consumption. Because in many instances, after you've bought a product, you have a large influence over the cumulative carbon emissions of that product. And so we want to, at Carbon Calories, it's consumer centric in the sense that we want to empower consumers to know what they can do immediately, often, to affect the carbon footprint. And then also to be able to say, okay, well, some producers are controlling their emissions of production, others not, maybe, but we want consumers to be able to sort of like look at both those pieces of the pie, because that, I think, reflects how the economy works generally.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you for that explanation. And Sandra, would you want to share what this would look like in terms of someone coming into a Just Salad and what they could see and how they would make those decisions?
I would love to do that. Thank you. So on my screen is our website, orderjustsalad.com, where you order from, place a digital order. And scrolling through, our carbon label is right next to calories. It's designated by the Earth globe. And so the way to read this is 0.74 kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalent. CO2e stands for carbon dioxide equivalent. And so the challenge we face as a company is not just calculating that, but contextualizing that. And that's really, I think, the most exciting part. How do we make that so familiar and contextualized that it's as easy as understanding what 360 calories are, right? And so clicking into the backyard barbecue salad, which is not our lowest footprint item because it's got chicken and dairy, you'll see a couple things. You'll see under nutrition facts, the carbon footprint facts. So we'll display the carbon footprint again here. But the important piece is that we're providing context. So we're telling you that we're doing a back-end calculation and we're saying this 1.24 kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalent, it's about 67% lower than the emissions of a quarter-pound beef patty. And our beef patty is the reference food against which we're comparing everything. And that's a very deliberate choice. We picked the beef patty because everybody knows what a hamburger looks like. And we don't serve it on our menu. So it's an outside food that we can compare everything to. And beef also happens to be one of the highest, most greenhouse gas emissions intensive foods to produce. So that's our attempt to give some context to the customer. The last thing I'd point out is our Climatarian menu. So clicking under Health Tribes to Climatarian, this is where you'll find that menu. And again, we're giving you a little context here. So these are recipes with relatively low carbon footprints versus the rest of our menu. And the context is on this page, we're telling you that the average daily greenhouse gas emissions from the US diet, on average, researchers say is about 4.7 kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalent. So now you kind of have a threshold against which to make your choices. And so under Climatarian, we have a carbon counter menu, which is our absolutely lowest impact, lowest CO2 items on our menu. But we also wanted to appeal to people who want to continue, they want to eat meat. They know meat is higher emissions, but we wanted to create this conscientious carnivore category. And this displays our lowest emissions items that contain chicken. So if you want to eat chicken, that's the only animal protein on our menu outside of dairy. If you want to eat chicken, these are the lowest impact options. There are lots of other chicken options on our menu, but these are going to be the friendliest to the planet. So yeah, that's a little look at our carbon labeling.
Awesome. And I definitely want to get into it. And Alexandra, you can kind of provide some context. I think what's really great is you have the option in a very easy way for people to make a simple decision. I want to have low impact options, and they have that option and they don't have to think about it. But then you also provide an opportunity for those that are more interested to learn more. And then the third is I love that you have watermelon radishes on a lot of your salads because they are my favorite things in the world. Alexander, can you add, I think the thing, and this is actually to both of you, and we talked a little bit about this when we chatted earlier, and I've had many conversations with labeling on all different aspects of sustainability, fashion, food, travel, and then also in the broader context of from gluten-free to vegan. And how do you determine from a consumer standpoint how much information to provide? Like to those numbers might not mean anything because they don't have any education or background. And what's the balance between providing that information versus like a label that might be a 1 through 5, 5 being highest, 1 being lowest? What's kind of that decision framework?
So I would just point out that the challenge with doing either color-coded labeling or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is that if you're comparing SUVs, a Hummer might be red and a Jeep might be green. But on a cumulative basis, like if you're going to measure your lifestyle, driving a Jeep is definitely worse than taking a train. So the color coding, it's always a relative basis. You know, it's similar to like in trading, like a price to earnings multiple is going to float with the market. So if the market's in a bubble, something might look cheap, but you're in a bubble. So it's like it's those relative measures are challenging. And so the way that carbon calories, the way that we address that is that we provide an absolute benchmark, which is the daily carbon quota, which is, you know, the global budget. It's the global emissions budget we have every year through the decade to reach the 50% reduction that's recommended. And we then allocate that on a per capita basis, pro rata, so in equal proportion to every single global citizen. And then that is a static benchmark that you can compare any product carbon footprint to. And so, I mean, I can share my screen if you want to see how it looks on the statement.
That would be absolute, because again, I'm continually thinking about if someone is going into Just Salad and they have 5 minutes to make a decision, and that's kind of like in person or even just kind of online, who's actually going to take the time to figure out what that is, and they don't have any context. And I'm definitely just playing devil's advocate because it's how do you inform, because I think what we're trying to do is how do you inform, what's the best way to inform consumers to make the most informed decision without overwhelm, and also, in all honesty, decision paralysis.
Yeah. I think it would be great to see Alexander's carbon label. And you know, I would just add that we are at the very early stages of an era that I think other people refer to as carbon transparency. So the era of carbon transparency is in its infancy, I think. So the work that people like Alexander's doing and that Just Salad is doing is, you know, we're on the cusp of something, and we can't wait for people to get comfortable with what a kilogram of carbon dioxide equivalent is to do this. We just have to do it, and at the same time start giving our customers and society the information they need. This isn't going to happen overnight, but people will get used to these numbers if they become commonplace.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing that it's important that the context you're providing is that you're not going to come to a better option if you don't put it out there and then get consumer feedback on how they're responding, right? Yeah. And go for it if you want to share your screen, Alexander.
Yeah, I'll share my screen, but I also want to say that it's sort of like people didn't get used to the nutrition label and calories like overnight. Like, and you develop like a tacit knowledge every time after you've seen like 10 bags of chips and of roughly how much calories on it and roughly how much sodium is in it and roughly how much saturated fat, you start establishing a tacit knowledge so that the next time you see a chip, you're like, oh, like I can sort of like frame that. But I'll show you, hopefully this works. Yeah. So this is our website, and we have 3 sample statements up, one for a t-shirt, shoes, and a cup of coffee. And the way that the label looks, we designed it intentionally so that it looks very much like a nutrition label. And at the top, it sort of like explains some of the specifications for this particular t-shirt. You know, this one is using zero-till cotton, which is better than conventional cotton, you know, and instead of drying it in a machine. This person is hang drying it, which reduces the electricity a lot. And so it shows how those factors affect the production stage and the consumption stage emissions. And that binary distinction sort of like separates, it's like the point of the transaction. When the transaction has occurred, it's in the hands of the consumer. And so that's where we draw the line to try and create an easy way to measure it. But the way that we are contextualizing it is with this percentage figure, because we take every single product carbon footprint, and this is on a per use basis, so it's not a cumulative product carbon footprint. It's like if I wore this t-shirt today, and that's how much CO2 that would emit, and then if I wore it again tomorrow, it would be another 70. So we do it on a per use basis. And today, like this t-shirt accounts for 0.4% of my daily quota this today. And so if you were to eat a hamburger, it would probably account for 50% of your daily carbon quota. So that's how much, like this t-shirt in this instance is very little. And like an airplane flight would probably be like thousands. It's huge.
Gotcha.
But even when you amortize it, but and just to like show, like we sort of like,
Oh wow,
if,
this is
if
well
a
designed.
consumer wants to go see more information, they can, but it's like it's challenging because there's you're not going to look at this every time you're in the supermarket trying to choose between a product. Like that's a little bit difficult, but I'll leave it at that and go back. But
No, I think that's great. I mean, I think the brilliance of what you did is that when you're trying to think about educating consumers and or changing behavior, instead of introducing something dramatically different and new, you're already creating something in someone's existing web of knowledge, which is that nutritional label, which I think is great. To kind of dive a little bit deeper into the work that you do, and Sandra, you can let me know if you all do this or if you work with others, like what's the technology that's required to develop these, right? I think that there's this element of growing and transportation, and there's so many different stages as well as so many different elements involved. What is the technology you're using and how has it evolved so that you can actually get that data and that information that you're putting on the labels?
Yeah, it's a great question. So it's there are a few ways to obtain a carbon footprint estimate for your product. One of them, the costly option, is to pay a third party tens of thousands of dollars to do a certification. And they will do all of the tracing and the calculations for you. Now, Just Salad has about 200 ingredients overall on its menu, right? When you take into account every single lettuce leaf we use, every single topping we offer, that's incredibly costly. But we didn't want that to stop us. We didn't have the budget to do that. It would have been prohibitive. So we decided to leverage publicly available databases that contain exhaustive information on carbon footprints. There are thousands of LCA studies on everything from tomatoes to your watermelon radishes. And that's, so we did the work in-house, and we did those estimates using those databases. And, I think that is not scalable if the whole food industry is going to be carbon labeling its products. So the technology we need to see, and that I think we are seeing, I was on a Climate Week panel yesterday with a company called Duconomy that is developing a public carbon footprint calculator for companies to use. Those tools are coming online, and that I think is where this is going. I would never get up here and suggest that every restaurant company in the US should do exactly what Just Salad did, because what we did was really, really difficult and really time consuming.
And just a follow-up question with that, Sandra, and then I would love to hear Alexander, is that just as we're thinking about where do consumers go and how do they make sense of this, I know this is new and the technology is coming, how does a business or someone like Head of Sustainability make sense of what tools to use and how to go about doing that? Like, is there, I think probably there's a lot of people here at Climate Week that are, and then part of the purpose of Climate Week and Marketplace for the Future is to connect these people, but is there a central organization, or how are you finding out about all this information?
So the way we did it was we established relationships with academia. We approached universities and we said, listen, we love your research. You're making this possible for us because you've published the LCA for mint leaves, and thank you. We really needed that. And those conversations have created so many opportunities for us and made this possible. So that's the short answer. It's a lot of, that's how we got in touch with Alexander in a similar way and started talking. So there's, again, if you have more money and you have a budget, you can go to the Carbon Trust, and the Carbon Trust will do a great certification for you. But it was very grassroots for us.
Yeah, and I think it's part of the purpose of events like this, and you all sharing this type of information, and Alexander creating these companies, is that there's definitely the element of larger businesses, like you said, that have money that can third party it. And that's kind of a top down approach. But I think with Just Salad and other early startups or kind of recent companies, we also want a bottom up movement, and that's going to help change the industry as a whole. So yeah, I just wanted to hand it off to Alexander. Any thoughts that you had based on what Sandra said?
Yeah, it's very challenging. I've been reading and reading this on personally and professionally now for a decade. And it's based on a decade's worth of researching, finding out what's happening, what companies, like what's an LCA, who does LCAs, what are emission factors, like where are the databases. It's a lot to take in, and it's not there's not like one repository or one center that displays all the tools that are available, so it's challenging. But in terms of the software and the data that's available, one way that I like to think about it is that I think 2/3 of global emissions come from hydrocarbons, so burning fossil fuels, and the amount of CO2 that comes out of a gallon or a barrel of oil is constant. It's known, like we know it. So we know exactly how much CO2 there's in a barrel. We just need to count at each step down the economy, like where is it being used, and then you would have a perfect record of the carbon footprint of a product. But but we don't do that. There's no incentive to perform that kind of accounting at a company level all the way down the supply chain. It's like, so we rely on softwares to model that chain of activities, but it's only because we don't do the accounting. And it's sort of another way that I explained it is that like software hasn't replaced the need for accountants in the world of finance. Software has not replaced the need for accountants. You still need an accountant to like enter the transaction often, to itemize it, to assign it to the correct general ledger. And then if you want to generate reports, you definitely need a carbon accountant. And so it's like in carbon emissions reporting, you're always going to need accountants to do some of that work to measure that, like my company used 10 gallons of gasoline. It was to power a truck, which was used to grow or to harvest arugula, and it was used to grow corn. And that's how much. So it's like it's a lot of accounting work, and it's really challenging to do, because companies, it's not sort of required from companies, and so to price it into their business operations is difficult.
Yeah. With all that said, there are other companies, big companies out there that have taken this on. Allbirds is carbon labeling their shoes.
Yes.
Oatly displays carbon labels on packs. So you buy your oat milk from Oatly. I think they started doing it in Europe before the US. So I'm not sure if you would see it today on pack. But I know they're bringing
I didn't see it in the supermarket, but I know that they do it.
Yeah, and both of those companies, by the way, have, along with Just Salad, they have these online explanations of how they calculated it. So the companies doing this, we are trying transparency on our methods to the world, so this gets easier and easier and easier.
Yeah.
And then the last thing I'd say is Unilever also made a public commitment to
Wow.
some kind of carbon labeling, but they haven't, to my knowledge, they haven't revealed very much. So I do think this is gaining traction despite the complexities that Alexander's laying out.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely getting traction. It's just that yeah, it's for small companies, many small companies, it's they don't have the bandwidth to do it yet. But that's where the software that you mentioned comes in, because like, for example, what Duconomy is doing is that they've made it available. As long as you can collect sort of like key pieces of information, you can run through their calculator and you can get a result pretty quickly. And that's an approximation. You know, it's not perfect, but if we have to go from 0 to carbon accounting like overnight, that's not going to happen. So we've got to step into it and figure out a way to make it more commonly used in the economy, I think.
Gotcha. So Sandra, you mentioned Allbirds and Unilever and a few others, and for Just Salad, like leading head of sustainability, leading this within the company, what was the decision to go this route of carbon labeling versus some other route? Like one of the things we're kind of talking about is there's only so much, I guess, space to put information, and why this over some other type of labeling or sustainability kind of proof point?
Yeah, so if I'm interpreting your question correctly, like we could have said, all right, we're going to put massive resources into carbon offsets, or we're going to put resources into telling our customers to eat local with us, or we're going to, I don't know, just those, let's take those two examples. So and you do see a lot of restaurants saying we source our ingredients locally, and that is great. But the transportation related emissions from food account for less than 10% of its total product footprint, total carbon footprint in general, with some exceptions when you're air freighting. So telling our customers to eat locally is not the highest impact action we can take as a company. The foods you choose to eat have so much more impact than the amount of distance they traveled. So that's just like one way of answering your question, which is we want to have the highest possible level of impact. And same with something like carbon offsetting. Carbon offsetting has its place and its role, but it is not going to, it is in a sense maintaining a status quo rather than achieving absolute CO2 reductions. So the final thing I would say is we were very influenced by academic research showing that there have been studies of the effects of carbon labels on consumer behavior, because carbon labels exist in Europe. And those studies show a statistically significant behavior shift by consumers when they're presented with carbon labels. They shift their purchasing decisions towards lower impact products. One such study was produced by Duke University and the University of Sydney, Australia. So all of those factors kind of played into our thinking to double down on carbon labeling.
Yeah, and I think the other point that I'm learning from you both is the versus just eat local or whatever you want to use in terms of the tagline. There's a data-driven approach to this, both in terms of internally, but also externally as well, versus some ambiguous kind of eat locally, which again can be good, but it's not the highest level of impact that you can make. Any thoughts on what Sandra said, Alexander?
Yeah, you know, our economies are large. A better way to answer that is to say that there are multiple factors that go into a product, and local versus freighting it in internationally is one thing. You might be able to, so like food loss is another factor. I think that 27%, if I remember correctly, of food grown or produced is actually lost at some point in the supply chain. So that means that if we're responsible, if food accounts for 25% of emissions, then almost a third of that is for naught. We just throw it out. And so that's another example where maybe local food, you could have some a better sense of what the level of food loss is. You might be able to have less food loss, but that's a separate thing. And then you know, what type of fertilizer, if any, is used, and whether or not you till the soil to disrupt the soil, or whether or not you engage in other restorative agricultural practices. Many things factor into the carbon footprint, but yeah, that's what I would say.
So taking a step back, I'd love to hear, and I'm sure people that are tuning in would love to hear how you actually got to what you're doing. Like, what's been your career journey? And I'd love to hear from Sandra first of what's been your background and your career journey, and how has that influenced, and or how do you use that experience in the work that you do today?
Yeah, so I prior to joining Just Salad, I had a nonlinear career path. I started my career as a journalist, covering bond markets of all things at Bloomberg News, and eventually found my way into the sustainability division at Morgan Stanley, the Institute for Sustainable Investing, where I really started to immerse myself in the topic of climate change. And over time, I got really interested in the zero waste lifestyle. So I really wanted to model in my own life what achieving zero waste actually meant, and discovered it was incredibly difficult. And I founded a group called Zero Waste NYC. And in the course of running that group, I contacted Just Salad and I said, thanks to you, I can still eat out on the go because you offer this reusable bowl, and I don't have to throw away any food containers. So thank you. And so I developed this dialogue with Just Salad. And as I gained more expertise in the field, I was fortunate to, you know, get the role I have today. But, you know, the lesson from my journey is definitely like, take action in your life personally, and that can really have ripple effects into your career if you're looking to get into the field.
Yeah, and can you share a little bit, like we've definitely gone over everything you're doing with carbon labeling, but what's your day-to-day look like? And obviously that's changed within the context of the pandemic,
Yeah.
but what are kind of the core activities that you're doing as head of sustainability?
Yeah, I spend a lot of time on packaging. So the packaging field is evolving, and our goal is to send zero waste to landfills. And so if that's your goal, and you have a contingent of customers who are using disposable containers, because we obviously offer those, what is the lowest impact disposable container you can offer? So I spend a lot of time evolving and developing our packaging to be as low impact as possible. And then the other piece of the job is implementing programs in our stores like composting that require just a lot of thinking operationally, like how are we going to actually make this work? You can talk about it, but implementing it in a large restaurant chain takes a full-time person. So it's running programs, packaging, and big projects like carbon labeling. Like those are like 3 big buckets.
Awesome. Yeah, and would love to hear from you, Alexander, how you actually got into the work that you're doing and a little bit of your background.
Yeah, well, I guess I actually was born the year that the world's parts per million CO2 passed 350. I found out that was cool. So I have that. I nerd out on atmospheric CO2, but I actually saw Princess Mononoke. It's a Japanese anime in like 9th grade. And that just sort of like lit a fuse. And then professionally, after I finished college, I started working in real estate for a green developer that was, their buildings were case studies for some of the LEED certifications that were written. So they're I think built the first LEED Platinum certified building in New York City. And so in America, I believe. And so I have gained a lot of experience in finance, in real estate finance, acquisitions and development, leasing, budgeting, and then I also have experience in direct deal due diligence of some real estate technologies to lower the carbon footprint of real estate activities. And you know, quite a lot of exposure to impact investing and fund investing. And then I also consulted for an organic farm for several years, which was really interesting. And so during that entire time that I was sort of getting this experience, I was studying carbon emissions. I built my first carbon footprint calculator in 2012, 13, near the beginning of that. And then I built a CO2 emissions growth model for the planet, like wrote a great paper, and then have just been sort of like, I'd been thinking about it the entire time that I was working, what to do. And so I came to Carbon Calories. I actually was sitting at my desk doing crunching some numbers, and then I calculated like the average CO2 emissions that would be equitable per capita through the century. And it turned out it was approximately 1,500, 3,500. And I was like, oh, that kind of like, that's how many calories we should eat each day.
Mhm.
And then I thought carbon calories, and I was like, yeah, that kind of clicks. And so, yeah, that's what we're doing now. So now I'm trying to give companies a tool to communicate their product carbon footprints if they have done a product carbon footprint. And then we're also developing software to help companies that haven't yet done the calculations to do it much more cost effectively. So that's that's the long trajectory.
Gotcha. And as we start wrapping up, there's a couple questions that I have. Where do you see, I guess we'll go with Sandra, where do you see Just Salad in this context in the next like few years in terms of being able to label, being able to kind of integrate this information to inform consumers about their choices?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think in the next like 5 years, I would love to see our carbon footprint labels integrated with some kind of loyalty or rewards program. So we're using gamification and tracking, just like you track your steps maybe, or if you count your calories or your carbohydrates, like how can we leverage tracking to make this fun and gamified for consumers? I think that would be really promising. We also want to launch more plant-based proteins that serve as alternatives to chicken and dairy. So that will also affect our carbon footprints downward, hopefully. You know, I do want to do a behavioral study of how these carbon footprints labels really are affecting purchasing behavior. And we're talking to a couple of universities about that.
Awesome. And you, Alexander?
Long-term goal or, well,
I think in the next, like, I guess year, and then thinking about it kind of 10 years from now, would you see like your work as well as kind of the companies that you end up working with?
Well, any company really that wants to put a carbon label on their product is welcome. So I have a list of companies I think that might do it, that could do it, and then there's a longer list of companies that might not do it, but who knows? We'll it's a little bit. I don't actually know yet who's going to be the first to debate or the first to do it, but long term, like, you know, MyFitnessPal, we want to make a My Carbon Calories app or another tool that consumers can use to calculate the product carbon footprint of their lifestyle. You know, I think that we need to be measuring that, and we can totally do it. It's something that's well within our capacity as a society. Behaviorally, I think people would enjoy it. I think companies can do it, and that actually, if you think about it, down the line, if governments ever decide to price carbon or tax it, you probably would need to be able to tell consumers how it's going to impact them beyond some like study. Yeah, I think it's a carbon label would be able to deliver that. So that's another thing that could be made possible when companies report carbon footprint, and when we have a climate lifestyle app. Like it opens up the doors to what's possible. I think it's exciting.
Awesome. And then kind of quickly, a question chimed in. Can you share, and this is for Alexander, can you share what green real estate company you're talking about? RE, the first LEED certified building, and what building?
It was I hope I'm getting my history correct, but it's the Durst organization. It was the 4 Times Square. It was erected in 1999.
Gotcha. Cool. Awesome. So last question and wrapping everything up. First, thank you all for your insights and your stories and all the amazing work you're doing. And then I think the other thing that was really clear, we're kind of at the beginning stages of a lot of these things. And thank you all for being those first movers and first drivers that are going to pave the way for many, many other organizations and also customers to make more informed decisions. So for those that are in the audience, what's kind of a couple, one or two pieces of advice that you feel that they can take from this conversation moving forward to lead a more sustainable lifestyle? Anyone want to chime in?
Yeah, so I think I'll just share what I'm trying to do, and it's been very much shaped by the carbon labeling journey we're on. Eat as low down on the food chain as possible if you really want to play a role in lowering the greenhouse gas emissions of the food system. And that means you actually don't have to eliminate meat from your diet, but swapping it out several times a week with non-animal protein is going to have a significant impact. And I say that because demand side reduction has to be part of lowering greenhouse gas emissions. So you're playing a role in that. And eating not only low on the food chain, but as low packaging as possible is something I've tried to do too. Like if I'm presented with a choice between an apple and, you know, a packaged sugary item, and my willpower is in good shape that day, I definitely will go to the apple for more than one reason, right? It's not just nutrition and health, it's planetary health.
Awesome. Alexander?
Yeah, I would say there is actually a lot of information on the web now. There's a lot more than there was 10 years ago. So if you want to go down a rabbit hole, there's actually quite a lot of information that's available online, and there are calculators that are available. So like you can get a pretty good idea of like what aspects of your lifestyle to focus on. You know, it's not going to be brand specific. It might not be product specific, but you know, it is possible to empower yourself with this information. And then I think that what you said, Sandra, about food is great, and it's probably the most immediate action that you can take. And so I would also say that limit what you buy, because every single object has carbon embodied in it. And the longer you use the things that you have, the lower the carbon footprint is going to be. You know, that's sunk carbon. And so it really, it's gonna, yeah, I would say research what you can. There is a lot of information, and then just start by just buying less. And next time you buy, like take some time to research it, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I was just on earlier, right before you all, I was on moderating another discussion with Sandra Goldmark, who just recently wrote a book, Fixation, How to Have Stuff Without Breaking the Planet. And I think it's a combination of one, consuming less, and then thinking about the organizations that you are purchasing or consuming through and what's the life cycle of their product or service, and really taking time to do that. And then something breaks, try to figure out if you could fix it or not. And I think that all stems with like consuming less. But I think that one of the things that's really great about all the work that you're doing and you're driving forward is trying to increase consumers' level of attention or consciousness through important information to help them make better informed decisions. So again, thank you so much for all the work that you're doing. For everybody out there, enjoy the rest of the event today. Enjoy Climate Week. And if you have any questions, you can always reach out to Marketplace of the Future. Thanks, Sandra and Alexander.
Thank you so much. Have a good rest of the day.
You too.
Bye. Thank you.